only will I ask the question, is smoking is sitting the new smoking, but perhaps we might even answer it as well. And I think it is a very topical issue. I think there's strong interest, and it's been spurred by a lot of very recent research and information that's available. And I've tried to troll the internet for you and find even more recent information than even I knew was out there. Literally last month's research that's come out to avail yourselves of the information that's actually out there, and so you can make some informed decisions about what you want to do, not just at work but also at home. This is life stuff, because I think this is not so much about sitting, it's actually about living. The question really is, do you want to live? This is coming back to basic survival skills now. It's not just about perhaps musculoskeletal discomfort, which is what sitting was all about in the past. You know, people would have back pain, so they'd call people like me in. Can you do an assessment? And we might suggest a different chair. It wasn't very useful, was it really? Now, of course, we might go in and suggest a different workstation. But it really is harking now to mortality risk, rather than just simply musculoskeletal risk. And the quality of life is actually reducing. Now, burden of chronic disease, because of the lifestyles that this society is leading, and future societies probably are going the same way, it's actually affecting the quality of life. Our life expectancy certainly has, over the years and decades, increased, apart from a little blip there in the middle. But unfortunately, the suggestion is that, in fact, the next generation is going to have a drop in life expectancy because of lifestyle factors. So back in the 60s, we overcame all of the major risks to life, tropical disease, or in fact just disease, and lifestyle factors started taking their toll. So instead of dying of tuberculosis and malaria and polio, healthcare got better, but people started dying of smoking and other lifestyle choices. So healthcare kept up with that. They're keeping doctors are the health system is very good at keeping us alive, but our quality of life is actually starting to suffer. But you'll notice that's around, if that actually works. Oh yes, it does. There, around the 60s. It was really in the 60s that the risk of lung cancer or smoking was linked to causally linked to cancers. The burden of chronic disease is increasing, so we may be living longer, but our quality of life is being threatened, and there's a greater burden on the healthcare system in particular because of chronic disease. So we may be living longer at the moment, but we may not be, or we may be suffering from conditions and chronic conditions that are actually going to mean that we can't enjoy those extra years of life. And that's information from that's on government website, freely available on government websites. So I thought, well, we need to give you some evidence of the negative trends that we're going to. Certainly our society is more sedentary than ever before. A staggeringly low percentage of Australians actually achieve the guidelines that are proposed nationally. Television viewing and screen viewing by children is at an all-time high. And only a minority of children actually achieve the low levels of screen watching that are recommended nationally. Do you think technology is to blame? Probably most of it lies in technology. We are, but also in society, you don't let your kids just go willy-nilly out the house and play down the park just in case they don't come back again. So your fear of predator, in fact, this society's fear has created a burden in itself. But certainly technology has aided and abetted that. And children are absolutely far more sedentary than previous generations and previous generations before them. And that has literally been in our lifetime. So there's a new term, in fact, Professor Timothy Olds, who is professor of the in the University of SA School of Health Sciences, has termed the new term screeny bopper as opposed to teeny bopper, to really get the message across that kids are spending more than a quarter of their waking hours in front of a screen. Now that means that they're also going to be usually inactive, except perhaps for we technology does actually allow people to be active at the same time, but generally they're not. So this is my term. I've termed the new, instead of Homo sapiens, we may not be so sapiens anymore. We may be rather computer sedentarius. And possibly, and potentially linked to that, but really quite a separate issue, is what you've all heard termed, again, the term coined is the obesity epidemic. The staggering facts and the scary facts are that Australians are getting bigger, more obese, faster than any other OECD country. By 2020, the prediction is that 80% of the population will be overweight. Overweight is coined the BMI of 30 plus. So your healthy weight is usually between about 18 and 25. Overweight is around 30. Now it doesn't actually take it only takes a little bit of weight gain to get a BMI of 30. Obese is usually 30 to 35. Bariatric is a BMI of over 35. I've done assessments for people whose BMI was 55. Chairs, you'll find safe weight limits for chairs going up and up and up and up, and you'll find now some of the higher range chairs go up to 250 kilograms safe weight limit. Healthcare is absolutely burdened by the growing, excuse the pun, problem of bariatrics in healthcare, because that equipment is out there, but it is incredibly expensive. So our healthcare dollar, if you add the issue of obesity and the issue of the chronic burden of the burden of chronic disease, our healthcare dollar is absolutely going to be, where's it going to come from? Fewer people are going to be paying taxes to maintain a larger burden of society. And worldwide, WHO in 2010 placed physical activity fourth as a leading factor in mortality. The other three were high blood pressure, smoking and alcohol. In Australia, the other three are diet, obesity and alcohol. So obesity and physical activity are different. They're not necessarily linked. So the question to you today, are you a risk taker? You may think of risk. You may perceive risk as, bungee jumping and going parachuting for the first time, doing that first black run. But perhaps there is a different form of risk these days. Perhaps risk now is in fact doing nothing. And there is conclusive evidence that if you sit for 11 hours a day, at the moment, your life involves sitting for 11 hours a day, count it up, probably not too hard if you're all office workers, you have a 40% increased risk of dying in the next 3 years, compared to people who are only sitting for 4 hours or less a day. So as I said, is the risk inactivity or is the risk obesity? Now you may have thought that the greater risk was obesity. However, the two, as I said, are independent. And there's a lot of evidence now that physical inactivity is consistently linked with an increased risk of all-cause mortality, regardless of your weight, regardless of obesity and your BMI, or defined by BMI. There are two definitions for obesity. One is waist circumference, one is BMI, and the two actually have different risk factors. In a very large study of 1/3 of people, twice as many premature deaths were attributable to lack of physical activity than were attributable to obesity. So if you in fact have both those risk factors, then you can see why the risks are very great. That's one reference. So it has been termed that sitting is metabolically toxic, that when you sit for more than approximately 2 hours, your body starts to shut down And this message is fairly consistent across the various studies. And in fact, the very first hypothesis was that we're still hardwired for fight and flight. We're still hardwired for evolutionarily former days. You were out there hunting the zebra, and we were home, tending the children by the fires. We had to be alert. We had to be alert for dangers to our children. You had to be alert for the tiger that's coming up behind you while you're hunting the zebra. When you stop and sit, the body says, oh, hang on, there must be an emergency. We must have to actually shut down everything, because when you actually need energy, we're going to need to have to supply it to you. So that is the theory is that your metabolism shuts down because your body is hardwired to think, well, there must be an emergency, so we've got to actually conserve energy so that you've got it when you need it. So prolonged sitting is one of the flavours of the moment for research. And this particular study again reinforced the message that prolonged sitting is independently associated with poor health outcomes regardless of how active you are. So you might do your Bupa challenge, you might ride to work each day, but if you still sit for 10 hours at work and then sit down at night time, you're actually over the threshold of risk. Yet another one, the College of Cardiology. Prolonged sitting is a risk factor for poor health and early death, regardless of whether or not you meet the current physical activity guidelines. And this was actually promoted in a Vic Health publication and guideline back in 2012. And they at that time also collated the evidence for that statement. That's actually out of their guidelines. A very, very quick summary of some of the physiological effects of sitting. We know for a long time we've been saying, gee, if your back hurts, don't sit down, because we know that sitting increases your disc pressure. Fabulous. So that's why some of the rationale for for me recommending sit-stand workstations, for suggesting that people don't sit for long periods of time. It affects your head and neck posture. You tend to backward rotate your pelvis, your head gets thrown forward, so your head now acts as a load on the base of your neck, and you all get neck pain when you sit for long periods of time, because of course your heads are far heavier than the general population's. There is far reduced muscle activity when you sit. Again, your muscles actually start to shut down too after a period of time of sitting. And you've all known after a period of bed rest. There was a very famous Berlin bed rest study where people were actually paid to stay in bed for days, but their bodies absolutely fell apart. Sounds like a great study to be paid for, but it was actually pretty awful. Your chest capacity reduces. You know how you tend to get a little bit tired as you sit? But very often that's because your respiration is not as deep, it's much shallower. So you don't get as much oxygen flow, and it's also because your circulation just slows down. Your heart rate drops. But the biggest one is this metabolism. Metabolic processes actually slow down and eventually cease when you sit for long and really inactive. So hence the topic of today, sitting versus smoking. Can we equate the two? Can we create a new paradigm? We know from the research that you can do as much exercise as you like, but if you smoke heaps, your risks are still there. Exercise does not negate the effects of smoking. And we've just seen that the evidence now, recent evidence, shows that exercise doesn't negate the negative effects of too much sitting.
Unless it's every 2 hours or so.
Oh, unless you're going to have a smoke while you're on your bike.
No, I don't smoke. But no,
right.
Exercise, so you run the stairs, so
Well, we'll see about that.
during the day and stuff like that.
So there is a bit of a paradigm here. There has recently been, it's recently purported that one cigarette can, if you amortise the risk of smoking back to a single cigarette, one cigarette has been associated with loss of 10 minutes of your life. Every fag you have, 10 minutes, you died 10 minutes earlier. 2 hours of sitting is equated with, if you amortise it all back, 2 hours of sitting can equate to 10 minutes loss of lifespan. So perhaps there is a connection that we can make that one cigarette is about equivalent to 2 hours of sitting, and vice versa. So you're in your office sitting for 2 hours, that's why it's cigarette. What if you do both? Sit down, relax with friends, a couple of hours, have a few drinks, have a few cigarettes. I'll send flowers. So, exercise is protective. We know that. The evidence is quite clear. Exercise is protective against many chronic health conditions. It is the cheapest and most freely available therapeutic thing you can possibly do for yourself. It is protective against all these, and is categorically proven it protects against all these chronic health conditions. And these are the health conditions that are creating the burden on healthcare and on society as we speak. You'll notice in particular Alzheimer's disease. Alzheimer's is strong evidence to show that exercise is an antidote for Alzheimer's. In fact, it's prescribed now as a treatment. Cancers, particularly colon and endometrial cancers, are linked causally with lack of exercise. Osteoporosis. In sedentary women, some studies have shown that there is a 1% reabsorption or loss of bone mass in sedentary women. And that's why women in particular are encouraged to perform loaded or resistance exercise to actually stave off the effects of osteoporosis. Lots of benefits of exercise. We know this has been around for a long time. This is not new. Weight control. It boosts your immune system. It is protective against those chronic diseases, as we've said. It improves mood. Your endorphins that are released are both mood enhancers as well as pain relievers. Endorphins are your body's natural morphine. And it is those endorphins that, for instance, the Chinese acupuncturists try to release. And a lot of traditional Chinese medicine or surgery is done under acupuncture solely, without other analgesia. Boost your energy because you're getting more delivery of oxygen to your tissues. Better sleep. I mean, it's fun. Well, not when you're on an ergo for half an hour, it's not, but anyway. So there are lots of benefits of exercise. It not just improves lifespan, it improves quality of life. So our burden, we could reverse the burden of chronic disease if we actually improve the exercise and activity uptake in society. But get this one, a Finnish study has actually linked exercise with income and has shown that in a twin study, and they are very, very conclusive studies when you can actually find matched twins, that being physically active increased your income by, or had potential to increase income, 15-year income, by 14 to 17%. So perhaps it is that the people who are physically active are able to function better, therefore are more successful and may earn more money. And notice they're males. Gender equality. Now, what are the current exercise guidelines? Current exercise guidelines, Australian government's National Physical Activity Guidelines recommends 150 minutes of a moderately intense physical activity per week. And that should be done in bouts of 10 minutes at a time or more, so that you increase your heart rate and exertion. You should still be able to speak, so you might be a bit puffed, but you can't sing. If you can't sing to start with, I'm not quite sure what you do, but anyway. Now that equates to about 30 minutes, 5 days a week. All right, so you can have Sunday off, or perhaps that's the day you have the day of rest. No, you're resting the rest of the week. You may as well go out there and do your bike ride on Sunday. Or 10,000 steps a day. Now 10,000 steps is actually a lot if you wear a pedometer. It's quite hard to get up to 10,000 steps unless you're my colleague over here who can actually manage 20,000 steps a day. So they're the guidelines. Anybody find those a bit daunting? There's also quite strong evidence that part of that regime should also include some really high intensity stuff for your heart, for heart health. So some really intense, vigorous training for multiple 3 to 4 minute bouts. So let's say you're on an exercise bike or a treadmill or an ergo rowing machine. go like the clappers for 4 minutes or so, then sort of just a little bit of light paddling, and then go like the clappers again and do that for perhaps 30 or 40 minutes. Anybody find that a bit daunting? Because the problem is that the percentage of really inactive or moderately inactive people in this society has not changed over the last 20 years. The moderately active and the very active people, you know, your gym junkies, if anything, may have got a little bit more active. But the people who really need it, the people who are going to create the greatest burden on our health dollar, are not doing it, because these guidelines are actually quite, perhaps a bit too strenuous, a bit too daunting. Can you imagine somebody sort of who is very unfit and overweight putting on a leotard and going to the gym, hopping on a bike? They will feel very self-conscious. So in fact, setting the bar high as we probably need it to be set for our best health, may in fact act as a disincentive. And I think a lot of this simply comes back to what we're talking about. How do we get ourselves just simply off our butts? Do we just simply need to get the message out there that a little bit of an increase in activity is good? And the evidence is showing it is. These are two very recent studies. January 2015 they were published. And it's showing that in a large cohort of people, some of the greatest benefits were seen in all-cause mortality risk in the very, very inactive groups of people who just increased their activity level a bit. So perhaps we could reduce the number of deaths and the burden by getting a message out there that yes, you can still do your 150 minutes with your vigorous bouts of activity, but there's also very good evidence to show that any increase in activity, particularly in your very inactive and moderately inactive group of people, is a great thing. So perhaps we need to have those targets also set realistically for that group of people. Aim to get inactive people to do a little bit of physical activity, and one of the key things is to reduce their sedentary time. The University of Chester study that really started this whole 2 in 20 rule looked at glucose metabolism in people who sat for 2 hours and didn't move, and people who simply got out of their chairs for 2 minutes every 20. And there was a 40% difference in glucose metabolism between those two groups. So you don't have to get up and get on your treadmill at your computer. Good luck if you can do that. I'm female and multitasking. But how do you actually get you can't, but perhaps you don't need to. Perhaps you simply just need to get your weight off your derriere that frequently. So, and there's another secret is to do stuff you enjoy. Professor Olds again has shown that there's about twice the benefit of activity as far as heart disease and depression are concerned, twice the benefit of doing a physical activity that you enjoy, playing with the pets and playing with the kids, as opposed to stuff that you feel a little bit onerous that's a bit onerous to do. So just walking to work because you think it's good for you is actually not quite as good for you as walking to work with your pet. Hey, perhaps we could have little pet creches at work. So there's no magic pill. It really is throwing it out there. It is up to you. We need to get people to get the message through. We need to start today. Find 30 is the guideline. But perhaps we need to also simply aim to increase your activity level realistically. And the secret is finding stuff you like to do. Women in particular, I think, need to do your resistance and loaded exercise at least twice a week. Walk as often as you can. Avoid prolonged sitting at work, which is your 2 in 20 rule. 2 minutes every 20 minutes, make sure you're not sitting. And also apply it at home as well. So here I thought there's some ways, it's not rocket science, and I'm sure you may even be able to think of some others. Other ways of reducing your sitting time at work. Just get up. It's amazing how quickly 20 minutes goes when you've got your head in a report or in emails. So you can set reminders, Outlook, whatever, and most of the time people end up turning them off. So perhaps realistically you might say 30 minutes. Go and see somebody instead of emailing them. Stand up for phone calls. If you don't have to be constantly vigilant with the computer screen, stand up. Walking meetings, short meetings, like somebody reminded me earlier of the Queen's prerequisite for short meetings. There is now good evidence to recommend to your work group to have short standing meetings. Workplace design is changing in response to this information. Activity-based work, which is the ABW, I just couldn't fit it in, however, has more financial drivers than ergonomic drivers. It's all about the cost of real estate in the city. However, it is actually creating more activity and mobility within workplace. Wear a pedometer, take the stairs. Sit-stand workstations are a solution. They're not the solution. It's not the one and only thing that, throw out all of your furniture and just replace it all with, squintillions worth of, and yet there's a whole swag of different options now for sit-stand workstations. Having more flexible work arrangements. You will move more at home than you do if you're working at home than you do at work, because you get interrupted by other things. And perhaps you just simply need to drink lots more water so you have lots more wee breaks. There's lots of different types of exercise depending on what you want to achieve, but they're essentially the types of exercise you do if you cross-train training in the gym. You need to do your cardio, you need to do your strength, you need to do your endurance. Ladies in particular need to do your resistance stuff, and some core stability for good deep abdominal strength so that you don't get back pain. So there is the last word, I think, and sitting's in there. That is the secret ingredients. I don't think it's so secret because our ancestors actually knew them. It's just that they didn't have such good health care, and they tended to die of other things that we don't die of now. But really, this is harking back to a former generation. That's how they lived. They did not have our obesity epidemic. There was a lot more activity. Our kids actually played and not played. And there was a lot more activity now than there was. There were healthy diets, no processed foods. Sugar seems to be a far greater protagonist than salt. So limit your sugar intake. Don't smoke. Clearly that's a carcinogen, and I hate to tell you guys, but so is alcohol. Alcohol is quite a major carcinogen, and more than about a half a glass a day for women is linked with a range of increased cancers. If you can then manage your hereditary and mental health risk factors, then you'll not only be healthy, you'll live a long life, but you'll be happy into the bargain. Thank you.